Sure that your motions are squeezing in and not pressing their head down. So when you include the traps, upper traps, all the way to the EOP and the nuchal line, squeeze them but don't push downward when they're face down. And I have the hydrocollator warming up the lateral shoulder. It's really hard to warm that. Yeah, and of course it's really excellent and important to release the posterior deltoid, teres major, teres minor, lats, infraspinatus, the whole lateral line.
So are you just trying to melt the tissue right there?
Yes. Okay, upper traps. Going to do some fulling. So my fingers are in the front of the traps, in the belly. Be careful not to push anterior to that belly. In the triangle of soft tissue, there are lots of nerves. But if you're on the front of the belly, my inferior hand, the fingers are pushing up towards the ceiling, then that hand can push up, and my other pressure can push down. This is a fulling, a classic fulling, which is a Petrissage stroke. There's sort of two primary variations on this stroke. One variation is to basically squeeze in the tissue repeatedly and do not slide over it. And the other variation is to actually slide through the tissue, but in either case you are squeezing through progressive layers of tissue. And in this area you will often feel crunchies as you do this. The technical term for that is paniculosis. And there are indeed the typical crunchies right here at the superior angle of the scapula where the levator scapula inserts. But if you work through the layers, you can do a lot of the warm-up so that once you get to friction, you can really melt that tissue that's tight. So I'm repeating the stroke, flushing through the tissue. You can see the tissue goes between white blanching or lighter blanching and pinker flushing. So you squeeze the blood out and the blood rushes back in. You squeeze the blood out and the blood rushes back in. So you are flushing out the wastes and bringing in the new blood, which of course is bringing in oxygen, nutrients, hormones, energy, everything you need. I'm going to pull the whole length of traps. Sometimes you want to come straight across, sometimes you want to go up towards the occiput, and of course when you pull across the traps, this is a time where you can sit down and use your whole body. You can take this on different angles. You can pull across to the other shoulder. You can pull across to the occiput. And hook into that tissue where it's tight. If I go a little bit faster and sort of steamroll the tissue, that is effleurage ironing. If I slow down and let the tissue melt, that is linear friction. They are both lovely. Moving the hot pack around. Now I could just, if we weren't doing a demo, I could leave the hot pack in one area for 10 to 20 minutes and then come and massage the area. But since I'm trying to warm up the areas of the shoulder that I'm not massaging with the hot pack to get work done faster, I can just keep moving it around the shoulder. But again, if this wasn't a demo, I could just have it warming up the other shoulder while I massage. Releasing the lateral shoulder is really crucial for releasing tension and immobility in the rest of the shoulder. So what a lot of people notice, a lot of clients will notice in their shoulder tension before you really start to work with them, they will most often notice tension and or soreness in their rhomboid area and through their upper traps and neck. But if you focus on these areas, you're not going to fully release these areas. The lateral release is really crucial to release the rhomboids and upper trap. So, of course, infraspinatus, deltoid, teres major, teres minor, lats, and even deeper into the serratus and subscapularis. One of my favorite real basic kind of warm-ups for the area is to use soft fists on infraspinatus, medial to lateral. You can use both at the same time or alternate left and right or do something else with your other hand. Part of this is going to depend on your hand size and the client's body size relative to each other, what feels most effective and comfortable to you. And of course, whenever you're massaging, you're assessing. So I'm not just randomly pushing through tissue, but I am simultaneously assessing what feels tighter, if there are adhesions. So what needs to be warmed up more, what possibly might need some specific friction or myofascial release after it's warmed up. And it feels like this area right here is soft enough in general, and that there's quite a bit of tension and tight spots right around here. So then I would start to do more warm-up in those areas that are tighter, sinking into the tighter tissue here. And whatever tool works best for you, knuckles, elbows. If I keep sliding through the tissue to warm it up, then it's ironing. And then if I slow down and let the tissue melt, then it's linear friction. So sinking into the tighter spots, I'm just adding a little bit of rocking, jostling movement. That often kind of gives a signal for the body to relax. And petrissage in the area, classic fulling. You're lifting up and pressing down. And that movement, like kneading dough. This feels good all the way out through the deltoids. My anterior hand is not very far anterior, but if I scoop all the way anteriorly, as I will do shortly, I will ask the client's permission ahead of time. But I'm not going too far anterior at the moment. Now, fulling, you can use whatever tool works. So, I mean, you can use both hands together or one hand at a time. You can press through with your thumbs or with your heels. But what I'm actually doing is, as I press through progressively, I'm actually working through the layers of tension. So, for example, there's a good bit of tension right here, and I'm going to keep progressively actually carving out that bony landmark. So as I get more specific here, I'm going to carve it out with my thumb. And I'm working through the layers. And how's that pressure? If a scale 1 to 10, 7's perfect, 10's to be like 7. Continuing to work through the layers, and my thumb is getting deeper and deeper, carving out the tight spots. deltoids, infraspinatus, and teres are a part that a lot of massage therapists don't address well enough when they're trying to release that general shoulder tension. But the traps aren't really going to release well unless you release their neighbors. You've got this wonderful triangular structure scapula with a triangle on top of the clavicle, and so when you reach around to work the traps, you want to actually feel that clavicle, because to move around that scapula, which is curved nicely to curve all the way around the ribs, it is actually being pulled forward and upward by the clavicle as much as by the actual scapula itself. So I am carving out the part of the traps that actually attach to the lateral third of the clavicle. And similarly, of course, the anterior deltoid attaches on the lateral third of the clavicle. So I'm carving out the clavicle, which is a nice S-shaped lever rod. So if this is the clavicle, I'm going to scoop out the muscles that attach on one side will be the deltoid, and the muscle that attaches on the other side will be the traps. And I can get them both at the same time, or I can get one at a time. And then of course that goes out all the way to the acromion. So your nice triangle on top is your spine of the scapula, your acromion process, and your clavicle. And those are awesome leverage to pull this whole mechanism so that it can come around like this and it can actually roll. So everything that pulls on this triangle is as important as everything that pulls on this triangle. And then scooping out, of course, we have the supraspinous fossa here. And the arm gets jammed up to the head, so we want to do a lot of pulling, lengthening, pulling that arm out. I can feel that it's kind of jammed in. These are ones where it's nice to get your whole body and do mechanics. So you can kind of hug the entire arm and scapula. You can pull directly on the arm as well if you like, or pull on the shoulder.
While simultaneously you're carving into the supraspinatus fossa.
What about carving in there?
Are you also doing that at the same time, it looks like?
Sometimes, yeah. Okay, now we're going to start working with the Scapula Triangle. So a great way to do this is to grab the inferior angle like this and the superior angle on top. And you can start to feed the two between each other as you're actually working through the layers of tissue. So we're going to start to feel what's tight around the edges as I start to move it. One thing that's important to remember, of course, a lot of people hold their tension in their shoulders, and so when people want a relaxing massage, obviously that's one reason why you're doing this. But a lot of the arms movement actually comes from the movement of the scapula. So when the scapula gets all bound up and stuck and lacks mobility, that actually means the arm is less mobile. For example, abduction is only possible to 90 degrees without engaging the scapula. Once you get higher than 90, the scapula has to rotate out. And a lot of the arms movement actually comes from the scapula. Can I put my hand in front of your shoulder? Was that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. So when you cup your hand in front of their shoulder, to be supportive so that they let go of their weight, sometimes it's nice to have their whole arm on your arm. Leverage arm. The scapula, this beautiful triangle, can peel away from the shoulder and tilt like this. So this is important to remember when you're trying to actually lift under the scapula, is that this hand underneath can actually tilt it on purpose on different angles. So a lot of this getting under the scapula is actually from how the underhand is tilting it. And then you don't need to put their arm behind their back and stuff, which actually doesn't free up the movement very much. It actually kind of just jams it into one position, aside from the probably rather obvious discomfort that and immobility and possibly even traumatic memories that putting someone's hand behind their back can have. So now as I lift her scapula, I'm feeling where there are tight muscles holding it down, and there's a tight part of tissue right here that I want to make sure I warm up. And I can do various things. I can petrissage, I can iron it with effleurage, I can use myofascial release, I can start to use friction when it's warmed up enough. So I'm going to take the tissue that's tight and squeeze through it. So when you start to move the scapula, you're actually finding the areas that are still holding it down, and you're going to actually release those areas and increase the movement where there wasn't enough movement. So rather than sort of just, getting excited because you can reach under one part of the scapula, you want to actually increase the movement of the scapula. Feeding it back and forth is helpful. You can see I'm doing twisting motions now. I've got the triangle like this, and I'm going to increase the movement this way. And get up and under what's tight there. And I'm going to slow down now on this tight area that it's warmed up. So I'm going to sink down into a 7 and then let the tissue melt. And row on a scale of 1 to 10, a 7's perfect.
7.
There, it's going pretty fast.